So
Yep.
it's Nicholas Gruen, economist, and yeah, we're having a bit of a yarn here, and we're going to start with some jokes, I think.
We are.
So yeah, trigger warning. First joke is a Woody Allen joke. That's the sort of yarn it's going to be. Let's start with Woody.
You want me to tell you the joke?
Yeah, you got to tell me the
Yeah.
joke,
So
and
it's
do the
at the
voice
end,
if you want,
and it's
unless it's too soon. Don't do the
oh
voice if it
no,
just feels too
whatever,
soon.
whatever.
You know.
So it isn't a Woody Allen joke. It is a Woody. It's at the end of a Woody Allen movie, and it's a Jewish joke that's been around for a long time, and it goes like this. Sounds like a New York joke, probably is. Man goes to a psychiatrist and he says, Doc, I'm pretty worried. It's not about me. It's about my brother. He thinks he's a chicken. And the psychiatrist says, well, why don't you turn him in? And the guy says, well, we would, but we need the eggs. And that's how the film Woody Allen. Sorry, that's how the film Annie Hall ends.
Right.
And yeah, I think you can. There's a lot to unpack in that joke.
Well, let's look at another joke, Lord Acton.
Well, before we look at Lord Acton, let me just say this: that I remember when I was in my 20s, I suppose, early 20s, I thought that Oscar Wilde's jokes were kind of formulaic and not that good, really.
Lazy.
They didn't really. Sorry.
Lazy.
Yeah, but
lazy
now,
jokes.
but then but as I learned more about Oscar Wilde, I realized that I was wrong, and that
All right.
the way to think about those jokes is as depth charges, as something that I think Emily Dickinson talked about. Poetry, good poetry, was like an ice pick in the head.
Nice.
And Oscar Wilde, for instance, let me give you a joke in the very first page of The Importance of Being Earnest. And he has Algernon say his servant is not bringing him what he wants or something. And he says, really, if the lower classes are not prepared to set an example, what on earth is the use of them? And I love that joke because, of course, it's just a simple reversal where people would normally say that it's the role of the upper classes. But in fact, in life, it's not the role of the upper classes. In life itself, the upper classes take whatever shortcuts they want, and these moral standards then get pushed on to people at the bottom. And I think of this often in politics. The ALP, there will be people with different politics watching or listening to this, but generally speaking, the ALP are better behaved than the Liberal Party, than the Conservatives, than those who represent the more powerful people in our community, because they don't have to behave as well. Anyway, so I think so I think that the joke, the Woody Allen joke, is a marvelous, just a marvelous window onto the way in which we lead our lives right at a sort of on the surface of all these other things going on.
It's about living with lies. It's about living with convenient lies.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. Yeah.
You really do not want to. you can't afford to call the lie a lie.
So
yeah.
Or
have
as a
to
friend
have
of
the
mine,
eggs, as you say. This is going to be an entry point into your essay. Your unpublished essay, because as you do with your prolific writing, you often don't get around to putting it out in the world. But I love it, and I'd like to get into it a little bit.
Yeah, go for your life.
Yeah. But there's another joke. There's the Acton joke as well.
Yeah. So about a year ago, I published an article that was, in a way, my summation of 10 years of experience working as an economist who had ventured into social enterprises, social innovation, and so on. And the joke is something I heard Gough Whitlam say. It's a great joke. It's a sort of high Victorian joke from a guy called Lord Acton, who was around about the turn of the 20th century. And he said, rowing is the perfect preparation for public life because it enables you to face in one direction while you go in the other. Mm. And my way of explaining to myself how I started with such high hopes, none of which really were achieved. Actually, I won't say started with high hopes. I started just with with curiosity. But within 6 months or so, I saw how powerful some of the things we were doing were, I was extremely optimistic and hopeful. And it turns out that in 1,000 ways, these systems that have been set up by governments and by lots of other people to do things, they've all got comms people, messaging, we now have this word, the messaging of something. Yeah. So we have an industrialized process of creating impressions that things are happening. And the secret of this...
It's fads. A lot of it's the frameworks of fads, as you say.
Well, they're absolutely fads, but the secret...
You say quite clearly that a lot of these things are fads and pseudoscience and things like this.
Yeah, but I want to make a more fundamental point, which is that we are now in a world in which we're not in this world in which one group of people are oppressing another. Well, you can say we are, but a more fundamental point is that everyone is part of a system and plays the role of victim and oppressor in the same system. And so all of the people who would have been involved in, and the essay was about Aboriginal, policy to improve Aboriginal well-being, but it was also about the work we did was in child protection and so on. And almost everyone in the system would have a good story to tell themselves that they were doing the right thing, that they were making a difference. And all of them would have done the Lord Acton trick, which is to say one thing and do another when push was coming to shove, when something turns up in the papers, when a minister is under pressure and everyone clears the decks and everyone is in damage control mode, then people are not saying what's on the mission statement. That's not what they're doing. And those are those things are actually what matter.
Yeah, that's it. I recall your excellent critique in that work, and you were talking about policy framework diagrams. And you were kind of deconstructing those, and I've referenced you on it 1,000 times and told this story. It's genius. When you were looking at a diagram, and it was a circular diagram, and part of that, one of the values in that diagram was centering Indigenous voices, but that particular point was right out on the outside of the circle.
Yeah, but it wouldn't matter if it was inside the circle because this is a fucking diagram. You're off in fairyland once you're looking at something, an image with 4 nice words on it. Yeah, and and somebody tells you this is their strategy. It's not their strategy. It's a list of nice words. If you ask the question, why aren't other nice words why aren't there, these are the 4 words you chose. Why isn't there another word here and another word there? And you propose the word. The answer is no reason.
Yeah.
No reason. So the whole thing focuses on people's wishes as if that was the hard thing. And the hard thing is always knowing how to do something useful.
That's it.
And that's not what these things focus on.
Well, look, it's grounded in this mythology that all the structural inequality, that everything else somehow in this representative democracy, that somehow all of the structures are built on the sort of aggregate of the opinions of stakeholders, and that if their opinion, and worse, not just their opinions, their attitudes, that it's their attitudes, and if they have the right sort of values, then somehow magically that'll be reflected, in the structure. And then, maybe that will give you your magical rising tide to lift all boats or everything. And it's not it. I really want to go deeply into that later, looking into structuralism and post-structuralism, and particularly how through post-structuralism we've tended to ignore that and focus on the discourse rather than the structures. And this, I think, a focus on systems sort of brings you back into bringing the structures into your lens again, and giving you a few more data sets to play with than just what appears in the text and what the window dressing is.
Yeah, well, look, I'm very happy to talk about it, and I don't really agree, because I think that what's happening there, so I do talk in my essays about these structures that get built, like what works centers, behavioral, sort of nudge units, innovation labs, and you have something to do with an innovation lab. And what characterizes them all is that it's this idea that knowledge can be introduced somehow from outside into a system, and it does some good things. Now, it does do some good things, and I don't for a minute want to suggest that these things aren't of some value, but they're being sold as somehow transformative. And the structuralism stuff is a somewhat different point, but I also hear you say the word systems. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on any of these things, but I'm smelling. I'm calling bullshit. There's an
ecosystem of
let me tell you why. Let me tell you why I'm calling bullshit, because I think the situation that we're in is the situation that Václav Havel, the guy, a Czechoslovakian dissident who became the president of Czechoslovakia, I think the situation that we're in is that situation. He called it post-totalitarianism. He was talking about well, it wasn't the Soviet system, it was the Czechoslovakian system, but he was talking about centrally planned communist system. How could that be similar to the situation we're in now? Well, he actually foreshadows in this essay in 1979, a long time ago, and he was, he risked jail for writing this thing. What he talks about is that what has been domination of one group by another has now become built into a discourse. Now, that sort of lingo summons up some of the kind of structuralism, post-structuralism, Foucault and stuff like that. But he doesn't go into that as if it's some thing that once you master it intellectually will achieve much. And that's what I agree with him about, because he says we are all implicated in this as ethical creatures. We can choose life, which involves some degree of candor, or we can choose pseudo-life, as he put it. Pseudo-life of saying all those things at the office, like, how are you going today? Well, it keeps me, you enjoy your job. Oh, well, it keeps me off the streets. For some reason, that sticks in my mind as a particularly vacuous kind of thing that people say to each other all the time as they live their pseudo lives. And so I'm trying to say to people, there are all sorts of ways, and I would recommend very small, low-key ways in which you swap a preference for pseudo-truth for something more candid about yourself, particularly things that make life a little more uncomfortable for yourself and others, and just try to introduce these considerations into the discussion rather than have them nicely smoothed over and everyone play their role in pseudo-life.
This is the big thing for me that I've taken away from our yarns so far. You've been really generous with that, and particularly, the way you just take a chainsaw to it. I've very much appreciated that because, you know,
he was, I think it wasn't a chainsaw.
Well, I was trained in education.
That's good.
Yeah, I was trained in education. That's my doctorate, my couple of master's degrees, everything, all in education. And so, you know, that's what we do. All of the ills that you're talking about that's what we do. I'm well versed in all of that. It's basically, you know, a lot of grifters and carpetbaggers going around and rearranging sort of, you know, catchphrases on a page and the latest fads of the week. Is it disruptive? Yeah. Disruption. What? It's been 6 years. How is that still a buzzword? Jesus. Yeah. Anyway, you know, is it disruptive? Is it innovative? Is it, we're being agile. We're being agile today. We're going to have a sprint this morning. Hey, we're going to have a sprint.
As if the words were the technology of being agile. To be agile in the way that a software team is agile is a big deal. It's hard. It isn't about wandering around with the word agile written on a board.
That's it. Now everybody write up their post-it note and stick it up on the bloody piece of butcher's paper that you want to. How many of those have you been through? How many hours have we wasted? It's just horror. Yeah. Upon horror. How many? I mean, I went and I spent decades going to all the conferences, and I was doing keynotes at these conferences, and eventually they stopped asking me because I'd be looking around the room and saying, "Oh, well, so here we are again." You know, the same old ideas for closing the gap and all that kind of thing. We're recycling those. It's, how is your motel room? Is that nice? Lovely, isn't it? We just come back from lunch. You're all sleepy. Yeah, how is your keeping you off the streets? How is the canapes there? Are you enjoying the canapes? Yeah, while you're eating that, I was going just down the street, and we're the same mob whose art is hanging in the lobby of this lovely motel. They're all in the park. They're all in the park because they've got nowhere to live, you know. You know, so I'd encourage all of you to do what I did and take your per diems and just go out and spread your per diems around the park, because you probably don't need all of it. Your per diems are not keeping you off the street. And, you know, and start considering policies like, I don't know, like for a start, all the money for this conference, you could take that to the community that you're thinking about solving problems for, and just put it into their bank accounts. And then I would say the gap will close like a motherfucker. And they wouldn't invite me back again after that as a general rule.
But I don't think it would close like a motherfucker. I don't think it would close, because you need the money, and then you need structures, and these things take time. And
I've just told that story to an economist. Like, obviously that wouldn't work.
No. I'm not making an economic point. I'm making See, I said to someone the other day, in fact, they were asking me to give the verb to keynote. You'd be familiar with it, Tyson. They were asking me to keynote, and it was to a university. And I said to them, I started telling them, I said, look, universities are a failed institution. You need to know that that's what I think, and that's what I'm going to say. But I think if you, and I don't want everyone to agree with me, but that's what I'll say. And then I'll be presenting you with a whole lot of ideas about what you can do about it. And they're not heroic ideas. They're ideas that could work out for your university. They could be little things that you start doing to grow the tendrils. Anyway, we talked about this, and I also talked a bit about the chase for metrics in universities, the chase for citation metrics, and you know, to try and get published in academic journals and so on. And this one of the people on the call from the university said, oh, look, that's great. Can you say that? Because I think we should forget all about that metric stuff. And I said, well, actually, I don't, because the metrics are institutional imperatives for you. So you can ignore them and then you go broke. So that doesn't help anyone. So what I believe that we probably want to develop a world that's pretty much post-metrics. There'll be a few metrics around, but your role is to try and incubate what that fucking world looks like, not just say, not just sort of express yourself and say, oh, it makes me really angry, I'm against it, therefore isn't that great? No, it's not great at all. It's the very first step. So I said to these people, I said, you don't realize I'm very radical in temperament and in my diagnosis, and I'm pretty conservative in my idea about what we might be able to do. And by conservative, I don't mean kind of right wing or anything like that. I mean that we we take small steps because what other no other kinds of steps are available to us anyway. But what else are we going to do? So let's try and build, but to get to somewhere better, we have to go there. We have to build that place.
Yeah, but it's I don't know, that's not how the cycles sort of tend to go in government. The cycles tend to be about building
and fads, as you
narrative.
said. Yeah, that's true.
And fads. Like you bring in
you've disappeared.
These integral coaches and stuff into the thing. You bring in your someone who's got a systems thinking model to install. Someone who's got this, someone who's got that. But you build the narrative, and then of course the cycle ends in what you're calling discursive collapse.
Yeah,
and
I do call it.
And then it kind of resets after that.
Yeah, you've disappeared from your screen, which is fine with me. I also got a bit of sound dead.
Yeah.
Okay.
So discursive collapse and the cycle resets.
So I'm just wondering, I must have mentioned that in that essay that I sent you. I've written about that. I wrote about that a long time ago. So discursive collapse, what I call discursive collapse is, it's a kind of kneading the eggs moment. And so what can happen is that a particular theoretical discourse, that is a particular framework, a way of looking at things, a particular set of procedures where you might say, you might say to a plumber or an electrician, if you want to change a light bulb, these are the things you have to do. Now let's say it's in physics or something like that. Then something comes along and it demonstrates, some theoretical result comes along, and these results in theory come along quite often. No doubt you will have been beguiled by Gödel's theorems and things like that. These
not yet. That book is too thick. I haven't been able to get into that one yet. But
these results come along, and they demonstrate to you that what you're doing really simply doesn't work. And then what happens, and I based this on, there was a thing that came along in 1956 in economics called the theory of the second best. And what the theory of the second best really showed was that if you want to reduce everything to mathematics, then what you end up with is a model of the world that is so brittle, so lacking, it's so lacking in simplicity that you can't ever use it to arrive at any conclusion, because the only answer you get out of the model is, well, it depends. And so at this point, the discipline spent 4 or 5 years going, whoa, this is a really big result. And there are lots of thoughtful discussions about this. And then after 4 or 5 years, what can be said has been said, and the methodology of the discipline simply remains in place. Nobody's come up with anything that people are happy with replacing it, and we just go back to normal. But what we're then dealing with is discursive collapse, which is that we have this discourse and there are various arbitrary bits in it that we sort of ignore, that there are huge gaps there. We just go, blah, 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 look over there, therefore we should deregulate, therefore we should spend more money or less money on this stuff, and none of it follows. So this sort of, and so what that's appealing to in a way is the theatricality of an intellectual performance, the theatricality of the expert. The expert should, there should be a kind of Hippocratic oath for all experts doing anything, which is to say what they know and how much you should trust what they know. In other words, how much what they know adds to what we all know. And if you take the example, for instance, something I know something about of, say, economic forecasts, then the very best economic forecasting will add about 1 or 2% accuracy to pretty naive economic forecasting. At the same time, the people doing it will fall in love with what they imagine to be knowledge that they have, and will pose as the experts, and will be able to pose as the experts because they're clever and they know more than everyone else. But what they're ignoring is the fact that all this knowledge doesn't tell them very much that's useful. So just imagine you, me, and a meteorologist arguing whether it's going to be on Christmas Day. And or rather, let's not make it. And then we can go and we can check out things like whether there's an La Nina and look up some tables, and we'll each come up with a guess. And the meteorologist won't be able to add very much or make it.
Well, and I won't be listening to him. I'll be looking to see what the ants are doing.
Well, there you are, and you might be better. But certainly the meteorologist should be able to tell you that I know no more than the average of looking up what's happening on Christmas Day. And I shouldn't have made it Christmas Day this year because there are various medium-term things that a meteorologist will know. But let's make it in 15 years' time. Then the meteorologist, then they know a great deal about meteorology, but meteorology can't tell you what you need to know. And yet, if they're and I'm sort of embarrassed on TV quite often, in interviews quite often, because they'll say, "How do you see, China in 5 years' time?" To which the answer is, don't even talk to me as if I'm an expert about that. I can crap on about it. I can say what I think about it. And what you should be talking about is how much value I'm adding when I talk about that, not how clever I am, because it doesn't matter how clever I am. Nobody knows much about that. Nobody can add much value to that question.
Yeah, but you can tell people, look, they're starting to look elsewhere for their minerals, so you probably want to stop being rude to them.
Yeah, that would be good. That would be good.
That's some pretty good.
Yeah.
That's some pretty
I'd be all in favor.
Decent advice. Yeah. So there's there's some things you can do. In your predictive modeling. That's, I don't know. I think it's that's pretty commonsensical.
Well, no.
Just invent that word?
No. Well, which one? Commonsensical or predictive modeling?
I knew you'd love that.
My point is that if you want predictive modeling of what's happening in 10 years' time, don't really bother. Use common sense. Use information that you have and some common sense. And, there's not a lot of, you can't put much more art into it than that.
Well, see, that's largely what I'm doing out of this Indigenous Knowledge Systems lab. It's looking at a lot of these things, like what they're trying to do with agent-based modeling and predictive modeling software and stuff, and saying, well, okay, so what's the affordances here that you're looking for?
Yep.
And how are they any better than what already is? Than the things that we've always done as human beings? How are these much better than that? And why do you need to automate these things? That's I don't know. That's where I'm sort of coming from.
No. Well, that's good. You'd be familiar with that book.
Which one?
Well, I'm holding it up. It's called.
Sorry, I was just I'd flicked across to your paper again.
Oh,
Super
good.
Forecasting: The Art and Science of Prediction. Oh, look out!
Now, the reason I bring it up, and I'm just trying to find the relevant page, and I might be in trouble trying to find it immediately, but so this guy looks at what are the characteristics of forecasting. So he's trying to forecast. This is a sort of whole new field in a way, and he started it. The guy's called Philip Tetlock, and in 1985, I think he started getting interested in the extent to which analysts could add value to predictive questions. And so a question might be asked in 1985, what is the chance that the Berlin Wall will still be there in 1990, in 1995, and so on? And he found out that it didn't really matter much how much you knew. the amount that you were able to add was extremely small. And so then the next part of this agenda of his was to try to breed, if you like, that's probably an inauspicious word, but to try to create teams, or try to create people, try to work out what are the skills necessary to be better than an expert. How could you be better than an expert? Because the expert hasn't been trained to make predictions. The expert, if he's an expert or she is an expert in geopolitical relations, won't have really put themselves through this question of how much do I know? How confident should I be about that? How much can I rely on this or that? So it's pretty shocking, isn't it? That this is a whole idea that has to be kind of built from the ground up in whenever it was 2001, 2, 3, 4, something like that. Anyway, so this guy's a psychologist, not an economist, not a computer scientist. And so he's interested in what are the qualities of a team of people or a person that does clearly better than other people at prediction. And it isn't about expertise. They need a certain minimum amount of expertise. These are the qualities. They are cautious, and these are their qualities and their idea of what the world is like. They're cautious, nothing is certain. Humble, reality is infinitely complex. Non-deterministic, what happens is not meant to be and does not have to happen. Their abilities and thinking styles tend to be actively open-minded. Beliefs are hypotheses to be tested, not treasures to be protected. Intelligent and knowledgeable with a need for cognition. Intellectually curious, enjoy puzzles and mental challenges. Reflective, introspective and self-critical. Numerate, comfortable with numbers. In their methods of forecasting, they tend to be pragmatic, not wedded to any idea or agenda. Analytical, capable of stepping back from the tip of your nose perspective and considering other views. Dragonfly-eyed, they value diverse views and synthesize them into their own view. Probabilistic, they judge using many grades of maybe. Thoughtful updaters, when the facts change, they change their mind. Three more. Good intuitive psychologists, aware of the value of checking thinking for cognitive and emotional biases. In their work ethic, they tend to have a growth mindset, which I find a funny term. They believe it's possible to get better, and grit, determined to keep at it however long it takes. Now, that's not what you learn at university.
Economists need not apply.
Nicely put.
Like,
yeah.
To me,
yeah.
No, present company excluded.
Yeah, well, indeed, and not only, basically economists on numerous of those dimensions have those, if they turn up with those qualities, they're slowly subjected to water torture. They can't publish articles because they're not in this format of, which is a mathematized view of the world. And so they're gradually replaced they become the sort of eccentrics in the department. If they've got any get up and go, they get up and go. And gradually over time, like the partners in one of these big pyramids of extraction, a consulting company or a law firm or a merchant bank, they get out. And you only end up with a certain type of personality at the top, and they're really pretty pleased with themselves because they can boss everyone around and everyone says how terrific they are.
Well, what did you think of that nice bit of what you might call pseudoscience I sent you that paper the other day? The one where they're looking at not just the mistake in economics is quantifying things that are nouns, whereas it needs to start including quantities for things that are processes like verbs.
Well, I think that all of those things, I kind of need to see. I'm more of a. Some of those things that's a nice generalization. Out of context, I think it's sort of.
It's a sexy idea. It's a sexy idea in the space at the moment. It's one of those sexy ideas because there's this idea that in Native American languages are verb based rather than noun based.
Right. Well,
sort of.
Well, my view about that is that this is
corporates are eating braiding sweetgrass and passing that little factoid around all over the shop,
well,
and looking at that. It's one of those sexy ideas emerging in space.
It's the TED Talkization of thinking, and thinking is hard, and thinking takes time, and thinking, if you want to think, you yourself think slowly, talk a lot, talk to people, and work out who you think you can trust. But don't there are good TED Talks, but don't trust some nice slogan, that's some new slogan. There will undoubtedly be some truth to the slogan, but it's, if you just suddenly say, oh, our problem is, we've been into nouns and now we need to be into verbs. Well, no.
Well, look, part of that problem there is what you just said before, that publishing is slow. Publishing is slow and the world's moving quick now. It's not even a 24-hour news cycle. It's constant content all the time. And it is, TED Talk kind, YouTube videos, kind of, stuff like that. And it's the sexy ideas that make people go, whoa, that's what's getting the clicks. And the point about that, one point to make about that, which I sort of imply in the middle of the essay that I sent you, is that if you do that, you actually destroy diversity. So the point, I had a long quote from Bill Stanner, who I've only recently started to read, and he was an anthropologist who he should be maybe the most famous Australian thinker, and most people have never heard of him. He was an anthropologist in the 30s. He headed out bush, and he spent time, as anthropologists did, with the native people, and anthropology taught you to look at all the customs and then explain their functionality. And Stanner appreciated that was a interesting and worthwhile thing to do. God knows nobody else was doing it. But he actually made this breakthrough, which is to say, actually, I want to encounter these people as other human beings, and I want to encounter them in their otherness. And of course, if you've got to give a TED Talk about someone, and of course, there are the woke brigade who'll trip you up if you use the wrong pronoun or say anything that, expose any attack surfaces, you can't do any of that stuff. And as a result, it's quite noticeable that over the last 30 years, official descriptions of Indigenous life in Australia have airbrushed out things that Europeans find uncomfortable, like genital mutilation, all kinds of stuff. And he was right in there trying to engage with these people as I like to think, people from another planet, people, absolutely, they're just people, but they're so different, and it's going to blow your mind. And this is going to be fun because we've got something to say, they've got something to say. It's very, very different, and it'll be a lifetime just understanding some of those differences and trying to build a fantastic life together. Well,
and I don't know anyone.
Nobody was too keen on that idea back in the day.
They didn't have to, because they were one was powerful and the other one wasn't powerful. But human beings are not at all good at this anywhere. But then again, there are some very successful, it's not true of all of the great societies, but some of the most wonderful societies are very multicultural. I went to Sicily recently, and I walked around the Cathedral of Monreal, and it's in the biggest city, Palermo, the only city in the world, I think, with 2 cathedrals. And this was built in the 12th century. And it is, if someone says, if you say, I want to go to the best place in the world for mosaics, people will say Ravenna. I'll say Monreal. You walk into this box, this cathedral. It is as it would have been in the 12th century. It is a gold box, hundreds of feet high, gold mosaics all the way down the hall. The top mosaics which are of the Old Testament, the story of the creation of the world, the lettering is in Greek, and that was by Greek Masons who'd been imported from Constantinople just after the Great Schism in 10, I don't know, anyway, things took a long time to happen there. The next layer down is in Latin, and these are Muslims. And they're all working on these mosaics because, of course, the Muslim faith is Abrahamic. It's all part of, these traditions overlap.
And the Sicilians are basically Moors anyway.
Well, indeed, that's right. There was something like 50% of the population who were practicing Muslims. Women were much more powerful there than elsewhere. So I just sort of wandered around this church listening to a guide, stealing from what they were saying because they were saying it to someone else who'd paid. And I just thought, wow, this is just an extraordinary human flowering of these different cultures coming together and finding new things. That's one of the recipes for an incredible renaissance, to bring together different ways of looking at things, and yet for war not to break out, basically.
Well, a culture is like an ecosystem, and there is exchange there across systems and across bioregions. But it's also an ecosystem in the sense that you can't build it. It's not something you can't design a culture.
That's right. Yeah.
You can't build a nation and decide what's going to go into the culture. It doesn't. It does not work like that. It's emergent. It's
absolutely.
Emergent. Well, hey, there's another sexy word from my pseudoscience there. Emergence.
Yeah. Well, I think of I like to put these things in simple examples, and I think of human beings as having a lot in common with polyps in a coral reef, which is that we build this house and then we inhabit it. And it's funny that we get ourselves fanged up about science, because science works best when it's investigating things that are outside of us, that are replicable, and planets that keep going around, or the law of evolution. But if we want to understand ourselves, well, we live in a space that we built, or our ancestors built, and we inhabit it, we live it, we reproduce it, we transform it. So science, conceived of as reproducible experiments and all the other kinds of formulas that have been proposed, that's just going to help us find kind of obvious stuff. But
that's when science is focused study of things, it's rubbish. But when science is focused on processes, that's when things get interesting,
but then it's not the same sort of science.
But too, I think economics largely, especially as you describe it too, is largely a pseudoscience. But
it is. Absolutely.
I do think it could be more. It could be quite scientific. And I'd like to that. But just thinking about, you mentioned that inequality and power relations, things like this before. So we agree that these unequal power structures, they don't just emerge somehow by osmosis from everybody's aggregate of attitudes, and that if everybody could just do enough cultural awareness training, that it would just go away. That it's not just people on the ground in their daily interactions doing this stuff, but it is actually, it is baked in. So how do you see it, inequality and asymmetrical power relations being baked into the economic structures that we're operating in?
Well, you started with that's an easy question, is it, Tyson?
Yeah.
You kind of just want me to tell you.
You wrap it up in 10 minutes, I reckon. You should be able to sort it out.
How do I see that? I don't see that, because I don't look. So I don't work. I've come to realize I don't try to build a model of the world which I claim then helps me understand the world. And then I ask the question, how do I change the world? I look around and I I ask myself, what does it look like would be promising to try and change? And that's where my theorizing starts.
Right.
So I would, there's a big, horrible word, which I even hate myself, and I've got to come up with a better word. I mean, one, I could use anthropology, another one is phenomenology. But what I mean is actually it's Jerry Seinfeld. Because Jerry Seinfeld has a routine in which he says, girls, women, do you want to know what we're thinking? He's talking about men. And then the people in the audience, the girls in the audience, women in the audience all say, yeah. He says, we're not thinking anything. We're just walking around, looking around. and it's a sort of gender joke, and most people think it's funny, and people think it's true, and so do I. But I just walk around, I look around. So I don't have, of course, in the back of my mind, I've got all kinds of implicit theories about the way the world works. You would be a mad person if you didn't. But that's not, but what I do is I try to ponder a thing that I'm looking at that it seems other people are not looking at quite like that. And that's what I've done. That's how I've come up with a description of why we can't get any of these programs to work, because I've taken the trouble to try to observe what actually happens rather than what we tell ourselves is happening. And working backwards from that, I then say, well, therefore, we should focus on what we can do. If we're trying to improve, if we've got if we're spending tens of billions of dollars, which we are, and we tell ourselves this is to improve Indigenous well-being, then we should be asking not questions like what are our 4 favorite words for describing our strategy. We should be asking what bits of this seem to work and where and why, and what bits could we expand a bit, and what bits, and what's stopping this bit working, and so on. So that's so I don't have a model of quite how, I don't have an articulate model of quite how power imbalance arrived, but I do have quite a bit to say about what we can do about it. And what we can do about it is we can talk to people, we can be very simple in our approach to people who are not going so well. And we can say questions, and this is what we did at the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, and we did it with families, but then we were quite confident, and we might have been wrong about this, but everyone tiptoes around Indigenous things and tells you to go off and get cultural sensitivity training and unconscious bias training and all that stuff. And I don't want to speak for them, I'll just speak for myself here, but our methodology was to sit down with people and ask simple questions to which you would imagine anyone could relate, like, what do you like about your life? What don't you like about your life? How would you like your life to, how would you like to improve your life? What things do you think you could work on? And what things do you think others could work on to get your life in a better shape? And let's build something around that and do it for a few weeks. And then if it's working, we'll know more and we'll build more, and so on.
Yeah, why don't you just move into a house that's not full of asbestos?
Well, yeah, but we did that. I mean, we did that in the 70s. We bought people Land Rovers. We spent huge amounts of money. We created a big backlash among white people, and European people were unhappy that they were footing the bill for houses that were junked. Now, that then turns into a big moralistic shit fight, but it shouldn't be. We have to proceed according to what we've learnt we can do, rather than according to these political slogans.
But there's a structure in there with the people who are in those places. There are zoning, things.
No question. But then I
don't think it's the bad attitude of police that gets people shot. I don't think that's the only factor there. I think they're policing something.
Yeah.
So basically they're in service of a. So one of the big structures that's there, particularly, is real estate. It's about enforcing zones and the sort of the unspoken rules that these kinds of people live on that side of the tracks, these kinds of people live on this side of the tracks, and to enforce that. Basically, that's what they're being paid to do. So they're given discretionary powers around particular neighborhoods in particular ways, and that's how it works. That's a structural issue. That's in there, and it's baked in.
Totally agree with you, Tyson. So now I get to ask you, what's your plan? What are you going to do about it? Because you're not going to get a lot of support. You'll get a lot of people saying they'll support you, but what's your plan? What's your plan? I'll tell you my plan. My plan is not to ignore those things, to keep them in mind, know that they listen to your words. They are, what did you call them? Structural. They're structural. Yeah. So you and me having an angry conversation probably won't stand up to those structures. No, that's what being structural is about. So we talk about them, we're aware of them, and then we try to build towards a situation where we can start to build constituencies, and the process of doing that might help with improving the structures, but it will also improve the situation of the poor mugs who have to live under those structures, because now they've got a bit of a sense of their own agency. They know they're getting screwed over still. They probably know that rather better than they did before, but they're feeling better about themselves. They're feeling a little bit of their own agency as human beings. So that's my plan. It's pretty modest.
We can all adjust our attitudes to, put up.
No, I'm talking about a community.
Yeah, but I'm talking about finding the leverage points, within these structures, and finding some clever ways to to get in there if possible. It's worth a look. I mean, it is. It's more than just being aware that they're there, and then sending everybody a PDF document on mindfulness so that they can figure out how to dust themselves off and get back out there and start applying for jobs that don't exist. I mean, there are, like you mentioned, that whole kind of post-Soviet sort of weird structures there. I mean, there are so many remote communities now, and the closer they are to a mine,
very like that.
You see it more. It's very Soviet, but it's all neoliberal branding. The place where people have to go up and be processed every day, for their welfare, or every few days. That's called the opportunity hub. And we're going to put you through training. You're going to feel really positive and do all this training. You can do anything. Follow your dream. No shame. No shame. Just follow your dream.
No shame at all.
And you're going to train up. You're going to have 20 Cert 5s in bloody every possible imaginable skill, and still no internal economy at the opportunity hub.
I totally agree.
It's just, and these structures are like, they're Soviet. They're limiting people's movement on country because they're on a really short leash. You can't stay away for a few days or they'll cut off your payment because you got to go and check in. It's there are structures that are getting tighter and are squeezing people horrendously. And these aren't things for me. I mean, you're looking at that intersection of economics and policy, and you're finding leverage points there, and you're finding I don't know, like I think that like this paper that you're putting out now, where you're getting people to face lies is that's a huge disruptive thing. So how many meetings are people going to be able to, how many meetings are people going to be able to walk into? There'll be people in those meetings who are just like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't recycle this.
I've been saying it for 20 years. I've been saying this for 20 years. I haven't seen a single meeting which I've disrupted yet. People like being comfortable, as we all know.
Well, because it's still only coming in at that point of discourse. And there is something outside of the text, and I guess that's the problem with a lot of the humanities where we've been going for the last 30 years, is really focusing on the discourse. It's looking at, well, if we can change the discourse, then we can change the power relationships. If we can change the words that we use to describe each other and the words we use to describe policy, if we can airbrush that, then we'll change the world. Because all these things are built on, there's nothing outside of the text. And I don't know, that's a good thermometer. It's a good data set. It's a really useful data set, discourse analysis, but it can't be everything. It can't be the
No.
be all and end all.
But I'm not into, I mean, you can say that I've done discourse analysis, but I'm not into discourse analysis as a technique. I'm into being a human being, living among human beings, which means I live in a discourse. I live in a language. You know, you and I are not speaking German, and probably neither of us could. So we inhabit this world that has been built for us by our ancestors. Now think of Aboriginal people. I guess half of the languages that were here 300 years ago are just dead, and probably another 3/4 are probably on the way to extinction, the way things are going at the moment. That's the situation that we're in. But I don't want, you know, I'm not encouraging anyone to do discourse analysis. I'm encouraging to be human beings, and to be a human being is to feel one's agency within a language, within a culture, among others who are like us, among others who are different to us.
Yeah, but then in this paper, I don't see that as a discursive thing that you're doing there. I see that you've identified basically a structural flaw.
Yeah, and I want to,
and it's in that the cycle, the election cycle. It's in the production, so it's in the process of producing policy.
Well, I would say, you see, I appeal. I've got the two last sections are what is to be done within an organization, and I'm thinking of a bureaucracy, not politics, and then what is to be done for you as an individual if you're a part of these systems. And what we've got at the moment is we've got the idea that if you want to do something good, you get a project, and the project will be, you know, more Indigenous people doing this, or less carbon emissions, or something like that. That's fine and dandy. I'm saying that there's another side to ethics. Ethics comes from the Greek word, I think, to be together, to travel together. And the other side of ethics is my duty to be honest with myself, my duty to be honest with you, insofar as you would like me to be honest with you, my duty to keep this infrastructure within which we all live and which we do our thinking in, the language and our culture, to keep it healthy, to get rid of the shit words in it that mean nothing, to get rid of, or not to get rid of. I mean, if somebody wants to, you know, we all gossip away and just sort of say silly things, and that's great. I don't, but you know what I mean, the falsity, the propaganda quality of words. That's the other side of this. And the effective altruism folks and the social impact folks, they're not talking about any of these things. And in fact, they've bought into the process of degrading our language and our sense of ourselves, our sense of honesty towards ourselves, because they're pitching their projects and all that kind of stuff. I'm not trying to hop into them particularly. I'm trying to say that we are facing a problem which is much more existential than a bunch of nice projects might suggest. We're facing a problem which is a bit like a fly with Mortein sprayed on it, which is that our nervous systems are dissolving inside of ourselves, or rather outside of ourselves. Our language, our capacity to think and to make sense of things is it's kind of all we've got, and we have to keep it healthy. And it's becoming, we've been degrading it for decades, and it's not surprising that politicians lie to us, because the whole tone, the whole cultural tone, is a tone of putting stuff over, of your messaging, the idea of sober candor, the duty we have to be honest with ourselves and with others, is just, it's got the Mortein sprayed all over it.
I think that's the thing that, you know, I've appreciated about your guidance, you know, over this last, it's been nearly a year now. It's been months for sure. It's been a while. It was just, I don't know, you're one of a handful of people who will hold me accountable for my thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
For my logic, it's
because it's scary. It's scary because it's easy for someone to come at me and say, well, you're being racist, you're being superior, you're white privilege. It's a very weaponized environment.
It certainly is, and those things exist, but it's
they totally exist.
I think some people can use it as a sort of a shortcut, get out of jail free card.
Everyone's after a shortcut. I
think you can do quite well in this world at the moment with the right branding, and it is difficult to do the work, and I got to say it's very enticing. Since I've sort of, I don't know, started becoming a baby thinker. It's very enticing to say the easy things that people will just stand up and clap for, and then walk off and sort of go home and feed your kids, kind of thing. I mean, that's fair enough. I think most of the people who are doing that, they really are just trying to keep a roof over their heads the best way they know how. Agree. But it is.
I think. Well, let me.
I don't know. There's something immensely satisfying about. I don't know. Spending. The last time we talked, it was like 3 hours. I had to go. I had to sleep for 12 hours after that. It was just. It was the best mental workout I'd had for forever. I certainly didn't get that at university.
Let me pay you a compliment, which is that you're using your own humor and your own essential modesty to speak about yourself as a baby thinker. Well, guess what? I'm a baby thinker. Any thinker is a baby thinker. Maybe Heidegger and people who are way over my head, maybe they were adult. I don't know. But I mean, if you haven't had imposter syndrome, you're an imposter, okay? We are little grains of sand, little tiny little specks of consciousness in a big world, and we get nowhere if we don't remind ourselves of that. And of course, we all have to make compromises. We're all busily marketing ourselves. Whenever someone introduces me, they say all kinds of things, and I just go, rightio, well, if that's what they think, I'll just leave them thinking that. They don't need me to go, oh, shucks, I'm not really that. There will be time for that. There will be time for that when I'm talking to someone who appreciates it and won't think of it as just a piece of a kind of false modesty.
Most people would only be aware of the Gruen transfer. Because of the TV show.
They would. But you have to hang on to that, Tyson, because and you, as you say, the temptations are everywhere. And
there are inducements, I tell you.
Let me tell you, I had a fantastic conversation with a guy. I'll tell you who it was. You can look him up on, you can follow him if you want to. One of the most thoughtful economists in the world, not a famous one, a guy called Steve Randy Waldman. He's got a fantastic Twitter feed. Anyway, I was having dinner with him in San Francisco, which is where he lives, and we talked about Martin Luther King. And I don't know what I said. I might have said, look, could we have another Martin Luther King now? Now, of course, we will have other people who are transformative and all the rest of it. But as he pointed out to me, he could pull in 50 grand a speech for the World Economic Forum anytime he wanted to. Well, that's a different world. That is a different world. Martin Luther King didn't have that option. I don't expect he would have taken it up.
Well, they explored that on a TV show. It's a black anime TV show called the Boondocks, and they did an episode what would happen if Martin Luther King came back. And so they brought him back, and he was just nobody, and no one was interested. I think
that's quite likely.
Well, because he didn't have any good memes, and he was just looking around. What the hell are people talking about? What have I done? It was just everybody was. It was in the middle of the R. Kelly sort of business, going on, and there was just all kinds of stuff going around. OJ, all this sort of stuff is happening, and he's just sort of looking around, going, oh my goodness. Well, if nobody was interested. They were just, oh look, it's.
And if you end up talking, I mean, I just watched. My son showed me a farcical interview on BBC TV where the leader of the Labor Party over there had said something. It was a trans thing, and the leader of the Labor Party had said something about that people. It was something about women and people with cervixes. You can fill in the gaps, you know. And so they then started talking to the female chancellor of the Exchequer about this. Should he have said that? Did she agree with this statement? This is a sort of weaponized little slogan. And like if Martin Luther King comes back and he finds himself talking about O.J. Simpson, something's gone wrong, because he talked about the kids in the slums. He talked about redlining. He was gutsy enough to talk about the militarization of poverty and Vietnam, even though everyone said don't go there. It's very hard to talk about those things now because
the other thing is
they're not telegenic.
The other thing is he'd be cancelled because of all the sex parties.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he'd be cancelled, all right. And there are some reasons to argue he should have been cancelled. There's some very nasty things going on with underage girls, but he was an extraordinary man.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You tell me one extraordinary figure in history who wasn't a bit of a dog.
Yeah, like, exactly.
A complete dog. I'm struggling to think of one.
That's right. That's right. But that's all we do. We look around, find something to weaponize, and then put on a 30-minute edition of the 7:30 report about something, and that's just massively destructive. In fact, Russell, I was never a fan of Russell Brand until I read a guy, you might be familiar with him, a guy called Mark Fisher, who is no longer with us, but he's a kind of cultural critic, and he pointed out that the reason Russell Brand was marginalised was that, well, I should be able to find the article, and he made a very good case that basically what was happening is that the sort of upper middle class speech police, he was talking from a different place. He's talking from a working class place, and he was speaking in a language which cannot be properly understood unless you try and listen to it, rather than just try to find ways to, try to find some tripwire that this guy has.
There's quite a bit of that going on in the UK right now. A lot of working class people, comedians, artists, thinkers, are kind of stepping up and trying to reintroduce class into the conversation. So
well, that's what Mark Fisher did.
The whole world is expected to speak like somebody who's come from university, and
exactly right. And that's what Mark Fisher. That's what Mark Fisher drew attention to.
We don't fucking talk like that.
That's right. Well, you got colour, you got gender, you've now got and sexual orientation and various other things. But this marginalises something of immense significance, which is class. And by class, I don't mean necessarily the British sense, highly class conscious class, but it's just true here as well. And education is the main marker for class. And we basically say, if you haven't had a university education, if you don't talk like a university educated person, we're not interested. You're a hick. And that then comes back into our politics, toxified via Pauline Hanson. But that's perhaps another.
That's an important part of the ecosystem. That's why, I know where you're coming from, and but exactly everything that you've said is also the things that a lot of very disingenuous they are saying in exactly the same way, but they're doing the weaponization thing as well, and they're dog whistling to a constituency it's really easy. A really easy constituency to manipulate, and they basically say all the same things that you've been saying, and in the same ways that you've been saying them, and then the damage that they're doing in the world right now is quite horrendous.
Well, I agree with that, but I see now I'm really at risk of I'm really at risk of being misunderstood, but I will press on. You have to see it from their point of view. And some of them are just nasty. I mean, just bad news. I pulled up at Melbourne Airport about 2 months ago, and there was essentially a Nazi truck there. Well, it didn't have Nazi swastikas on it, but it had blood and soil written, which was a Nazi slogan on it. And it just gave me the absolute creeps. So I'm not talking about that. But if you have certain views, the media will not pay you any attention whatever if you don't weaponize them in these kinds of ways.
Well, it's quite simply because of the algorithm that comes under. All content goes under an algorithm, and if you're speaking that way, that goes straight to this dog whistle algorithm for a whole heap of very, very, very bad stuff. Really intensely weaponized misogyny, and they'll use, if you're saying it in mild ways, they'll use that as an icebreaker, as something.
Right.
They'll use it in the first tier to radicalize people. So you're coming in with, Nicholas Gruen saying these very reasonable things. It makes a lot of sense. What's the next video? Click that. Next minute, you're completely radicalized into incel or bloody, MGTOWs or something like that. And you basically, you found yourself, but they'll use you as an icebreaker. And that's the problem with it. That's why it gets shut down. Because it's basically radicalizing people into these really horrendously damaging things that not only polarizing everybody, but these young men are then running out writing manifestos and shooting up schools, shooting up mosques, all these sorts of things. It's pretty much most of the mass shootings in the United States are linked to this. It's some pretty horrendous stuff. So it's everything you do. If you're accountable to your word, you have to be aware of your the algorithm that you're creating and your space in the ecosystem. And I'm very intensely aware of that because of my flirtations with the complexity theory community. That brings you adjacent to a lot of a lot more troubling sort of communities as well. There's a lot of overlap there, and a lot of that stuff is kind of used as an icebreaker to get into some other pretty crappy ideas that's on the surface seems all right, but it's actually quite disingenuous. So you got to be careful with you got to mix things up a bit.
Well, I agree.
Absolutely. I think structurally, when you're looking at how policy is enacted, and how much it's informed by throwing up these buzzwords and throwing together these just gammon frameworks, and basically just completing the cycle, going towards discursive collapse, discursive death, in preparation for the next cycle. It's like that. I think that's a little basin of attraction there. That's a little leverage point that's probably worth exploring, because I think there's probably some sort of mechanism you could get going in a few spaces there to really disrupt things in some pretty productive ways, I reckon. I reckon you need to get that paper out there, and need to start having some yarns with some decent thinkers, who might be able to put work with you to put together a couple of little actions there, just little things that you could start enacting and getting people trying out. I have no idea what they are yet, but I can see something happening there.
I've said what some of them are in the conclusion of the essay, but they're not things. In the organizational section, I've talked about this thing which take too long to explain, called the Evaluator General. Is not quite what it seems. But in the personal section, I've talked about people choosing, in however small a way, the truth and life over falsity and pseudo life. Now, that can't really be measured. But people feel it. And I'm addressing myself not to the system, but to the people in the system. We have disappeared inside this machine, and we have to emerge defending life. We have to emerge defending the possibility that when somebody says something, it leads somewhere where we weren't expecting, not where we were expecting. And that's a scary prospect because, of
Nice.
course, there are people in bad faith, and we have to assert that there are also people of good faith, that there are people who want to speak with each other, commune with each other, find out about each other, be honest about themselves to each other in a way that is is not blurting it out as if you're in an encounter session, but is an exploration, a gentle, often exploration of the possibility of shared meaning. And we've lost, that sounds, well, just sort of, a lot of people will just think I'm talking gobbledygook, but I think younger people, people who have to falsify everything they say about themselves when they go to a job interview or try and get a scholarship, have to make up a TED talk about themselves. When I talk to people about these things, when I read them that extraordinary set of paragraphs about how this guy spent 10 years of his life lying, and he's a good guy or a woman, we don't know who it was, they get this. They know that they're in this system. And I want to draw attention to that, and then to say we're all capable of choosing in some small way to live within something we think is closer to the truth rather than something we think is closer to what we want people to hear us say. That's
the tricky thing. Look, and I think I think the one thing that I've been doing that's been a lot of fun is resisting branding and marketing. So I'm sort of I spend most of my time just thinking up culture jams whereby I can disrupt the sort of branding and algorithmizing of whatever it is that I'm starting to represent to people. I try to sabotage that at least once a day. And, that's been a lot of fun until I started to sort of think, oh, hang on a minute, that's my brand. Hey. So I think I ended up branding myself anyway. But,
culture is dynamic. Culture is dynamic. You can't get ahead of it. It's a lava lamp.
In the end, you do have to feed yourself, and all the people in these organizations, policymakers included, they have to go home and put a roof over their kids' heads. It's anything that's going to happen is going to happen slow, which is unfortunate at a time when a bit of urgency is needed. But I guess we'll see how we go.
Well, some things can happen fast, but you don't quite know what they are, and things can go out of fashion fast. So things can happen fast, but we can't. We're not. I'm not interested in thinking of myself as the social engineer at the top of this system. I like to think about that. I like to think about what people who might be there and I'll never be there might do. And the fact is they're part of the system too. As Václav Havel says, the Prime Minister and the greengrocer are both complicit in this system. They both reproduce it. The Prime Minister has more power, but also has more constraints on them. And they basically, so I want to think about the system, but I also want to remind myself and everyone else that we are human beings. We're going to end up in a box, and we need to try and we need to feel as if we are choosing better rather than worse with the people we talk to, with what we do, in whatever way unfolds, in whatever way we feel is right for us.
Capital is very good at leveraging disasters, for massive and rapid change. So maybe we need to start thinking from that. You can't change things from the top. That's a very slow moving beast. The top is structured as it's structured, and it's there for a reason. And capital doesn't really care about that either. But they do leverage disasters really well, and maybe that's what we need to start doing too. A bit of crisis capitalism, but crisis Gruenism going the other way. See how we can go. Well, look, we run out of time, and I get to get back to my kids. Speaking of, So
Okay.
yeah, we'll have to wrap her up. But thanks for the yarn again, brother.
Thank you. It was fun.
Put me through my paces.
Put me through mine.
I still want to get back to
yeah.
I want to get back to supply and demand with you at some stage. I've got questions. Questions, and that's some of my better and more popular pieces of pseudoscience and little bits and pieces of grifts going on around that. So I want to sort of get into my logics around that and see where the flaws are. But we'll do that one next time.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thanks, Brad.